Thanks for joining, everybody. I'm Hernando Buitrago. I'm the head of marketing here at Privado, and I have Ben Venker, who's our principal product manager, joining us. He's going to be leading this presentation on getting started with Privado's privacy code scanning.
All right, thanks, Hernando. Hey, everybody. My name is Ben. As Hernando mentioned, I'm the product manager here at Privado. Just a little bit of background on me. I was previously at a company called SourceGraph. It was a kind of Google for code search, still in operation. I was the head of the search team there. Today, we're going to talk about the data visibility struggle, privacy code scanning, Privado use cases. Then we'll do a brief demo. And then, as Hernando mentioned, we'll go over some Q&A. So when we start thinking about the struggle of visibility on data usage, there's kind of three buckets that we think about here, really. So, data processing is distributed across your organizations, across microservices, APIs, different data pipelines, personal computers, et cetera. There's really not a lot of visibility there into how applications collect, store user leak data. Data flow changes with each release. So those of you that are familiar with the development process and are in a modern software shop probably are aware that you're releasing sometimes, hundreds of times a day, but usually at least multiple times a week. And that can mean that data access has changed, the way that the program is accessing data has changed, who has access to the data has changed. And so that can cause a lot of problems. It makes it very difficult to implement privacy by design because the code is changing and if privacy isn't embedded in that development practice, you're going to run into a lot of issues there potentially. And then finally, the governance on use of personal data. Policies and contracts are not going to be in sync with the code most of the time because those departments can tend to move slower than software and product development moves. And so that causes kind of an inability to meet commitments, leading to increased risk of mistakes and misrepresentations. I think one of the most kind of poignant quotes here is at the bottom right, where the meta quote, where they're kind of saying we don't have an adequate level of control and explainability over how our systems use data, and thus we can't confidently make controlled policy changes or external commitments, such as we will not use X data for Y purpose. That's a pretty compelling quote, I think, that kind of describes the state of modern applications and modern software development and modern privacy in terms of the state of the data that everyone's kind of interacting with. So you can see these source code privacy violations just historically, some of the things that have happened, big name companies that people are aware of, Zoom, Meta, Grindr, Aurora Health, a lot of these things around like the Facebook Pixel, things like that. H&R Block, another one, which has a bunch of tax data, obviously not a good situation, even geolocation of rental vehicles here you can see for a V-Coil. And the fines are quite large, as I'm sure you're all aware. So this is becoming an increasingly big problem, and the fines are just getting bigger as time goes on and things get more serious for the offenders. So what is the solution to this? At Privado, we think it's privacy code scanning. So what does that mean? We discover and classify personal data. And to do that, we're looking at the application source code. So it's a little bit different approach than other companies are taking right now, where you're maybe looking at databases and where data may already be stored, or looking at network calls where data may already be leaked and is transitioning from your application through an API to a third party. What we kind of do is try and stop that at the source and analyze your source code to see where the API is being used. And then also from there, we can tell where it's flowing throughout your system. So we can give you those complete data flows. And then that enables you to find those privacy issues and fix them in tandem with the development team. And then from there, we enable the ability to monitor privacy policies and rules that you can create and that we can provide for you as well for monitoring and continuous privacy compliance. So we kind of call that privacy by code. And one of the things that people are doing, like approaches I mentioned previously, you've got the kind of process level, which is sort of reactive, where you're doing manual processes, manual data maps, robo analyses kind of after the fact, and just kind of their point in time, right? So they're just basically giving you the static state at that time you did the assessment. Things could change, like we talked about, source code changing rapidly in modern product development environments. That can be out of date basically as soon as you create it. If you look at the data store level, similarly reactive, the data is already there. And so there's really not much you can do about it short of remove it if someone gives you a request for deletion or something like that. But at that point, the data is already leaked where you may not want it to be. And so, the approach we recommend is kind of at the source code level, you can be more proactive because you can say, okay, this application, once it's executed, will send this data, this PII data, to this data source, to this database, to this API, this third party, et cetera. And so the real advantage here is when you use this in tandem with other privacy protection methods, because you can say here, we're not going to let this application be deployed, for example, until the offending code has been fixed and remediated, so that the application doesn't send the code to whatever third party or whatever database it's not supposed to. So some of the big use cases we see are really compliance, risk reduction, and governance. The dynamic data mapping and robot automation piece can be a big time saver, which we'll talk about in a bit, in terms of just increasing the accuracy of what you're going to get as an artifact, and then also making sure that you're spending the least amount of time possible, and it is always up to date. ROPA generation, kind of similarly, when you're doing those application assessments, and really quickly, just for anyone who's not aware, ROPA stands for Request to Processing Activity, and what that is a report on basically what is the business purpose of an application and what data is being used, what third parties is the data being shared with, et cetera. And so those can be quite time consuming to get done because you're sending those forms typically to engineering, who's going to have to go through and dig up all the different PII that's being used in an application. They may not have the context all in their head anymore. So it can take weeks, months, sometimes to get those things completed. So again, that will save tons of developer hours potentially with being able to generate those automatically. We also integrate with all the major code hosts like GitHub. We have Slack integration. We have developer-centric approach to ROPA completion with Jira integration, Slack integrations, email notifications, et cetera. And then as far as risk reduction goes, find and fixing those shadow data flows, which just means kind of data flows you may not be aware of that are happening. A good example of that would be leakages to log files or to Google Analytics like you see here. And then generating that true data inventory, which is really nice because you can get a sense of not just all the data that you have, which is obviously useful from a risk management perspective, but being able to see all the data that's actually in use and is being executed, in the execution of the code is being used that way. So you really see what you can prioritize in terms of data inventory and privacy issues. And then really enabling that privacy by design and privacy by code from a governance perspective, being able to leverage privacy impact assessments, et cetera, to inform kind of how the guardrails look for software development and integration with the continuous integration and continuous discovery or continuous deployment pipelines that developers use to make sure that those things are getting caught before they move into production. So just some quick numbers around that. What we're hearing from customers is data maps take hours instead of months to complete, and in addition, they're up to date. So maybe some of you have participated in a data mapping exercise where it took 1, 3, 6 months even to complete. And then, it's basically out of date by the time it's done because it was started so long ago. And then you maybe do those only once or twice a year. And a lot of it is what you're getting is just the data that you have. It's very difficult to keep up to date with where the data is coming from and how it got there, right? So that's one of the big advantages here. As far as risk reduction, one of the things we see at customers is when they do kind of an initial scan, they'll find as many as 100 log leakages and third-party leakages found where PII that they don't want sent to a third party is going to a third party, or data is just being sent to PII data is just being sent to log files, which just means log files can be particularly dangerous if you're not aware because they tend to not get deleted very often, and so data can just sort of persist in there for long periods of time. And pretty much any developer is likely to have access to log files, at least for the systems that they access and that they work on, because they are used for debugging and things like that. And so you can have PI floating around in a very, kind of public database that many, many people are accessing. And then we also on the governance end see a big 90% or more time savings when executing privacy checks. So when you're doing those assessments, when you're looking at what the privacy impact is of different applications, all those things are much faster with this kind of automation happening in the application for you. So with that, I think I'm going to go to the demo. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'm just going to go to the next screen and show the product demo. So here what we're looking at is the Privado login screen. So if I start off and log into Privado, what this is a list of all of the repositories that I have in my Privado account. So you can kind of see here all these different ones with a different risk rating associated with them. You can see here there was 2 new data elements in this healthcare repository since it was on the most recent scan. And then you can kind of see data elements, what the sensitivity is, the third parties that were found, et cetera. So I'm going to go look for, or actually it's right here, this Shopizer repo. So this is a repository that is basically a very popular open source e-commerce platform. So it should give us some good examples of data elements that are being used and where they're being used and how they're flowing through the database. So you can see here, this is everything that was found just in this application. So this is account name, phone number, card number, and these are all the places that it's going. So if I just kind of scroll down to get a sense of the breadth of these different PI elements, let's click on email address. And then you can see here this data flow diagram that shows you all the different places where email address is being sent by this application. So we've got sharing to AWS, Stripe, and Braintree. Storage is Sales Manager is the name of the database for this application. So that's where that's going. And you can see here, we've also got the read and the write operations, log leakages like we talked about. So there's several different log leakages happening here. Processing is just kind of a general term for places where the PI is being executed in the application. And collection here, you can see we have the API endpoints where it's being used. And then if we go to the code analysis, you can see here where it's being executed in the code. So that's really most useful for engineers that are looking at this, but you can see that you can get through all this stuff as an engineer looking at the different codes, the application code to see where this is being executed. I see we have a question from Garage. Looks like, can Privado be deployed on premise for enterprises that are sensitive to code sharing? Yeah, we have clients that do on premise today. So yes is the answer to your question. I'll type that too, just so we have it in the chat for later for the archive. So on the data inventory piece, one thing I want to show too is this top level data inventory. So this is giving you the view across your entire account. So every repository is aggregated here to show you what all PI data elements are being detected. And so you can see in this column the number of repositories where that's being used. So email address, for example, is being used in 25 different repositories. And here we can see all the different repos where that's being used. Let's take a look at password 21 times as well. And if we look at this banking system backend here, actually, I just want to go to the data flows. This shows you, again, kind of where it's being used across the repositories in this data flow. Then if I go to third parties, you get this full inventory of your third parties, that the vendors that you're being actually using your application via APIs, et cetera. So, you can see here Google Firebase, Stripe, Amplitude, SendGrid, Slack, all of these different third parties that are being used. And then you can get this kind of this inverse view here of what data is being sent to Stripe from a particular repository. So this can be really useful. Like for example, here we're sending gender to Stripe. Maybe that's not really that relevant. Maybe date of birth really isn't required. Looks like Sam has a question. How does this work with analytics ecosystems like Databricks or Dremio, where SQL queries are run and ETLs are being built? So I think, Sam, and feel free to chime in here if you have clarification. Are you talking about when SQL queries are being built dynamically and then the ETL processes are running off of that? Or just in general, how do we handle SQL code that might be, or SQL queries that might be in the application code? Okay, I'll give Sam a chance to answer. We'll come back. Oh, here's another. Oh, there's another question. Jim's asking, at the intersection of privacy and security, advice for separating PI and security logs as leakage when identifier needed for, say, ransomware investigation and response, blast radius analysis, internal or external victim notification, et cetera. Jim's curious if our detection rules are extensible, log equals leakage unless security logs, and then do this other thing, for example. So yeah, what we do with customers today is help them configure privacy rules. So we can do things like, if this is like kind of what you're describing, if you detect this log, it's a leakage. If it's going to this database, then it wouldn't be a high severity issue or an issue at all. And so that's kind of how this is going to work, if that makes sense. But basically, it's kind of a rules engine, logical rules that let the issues get created based on parameters that you set. Great. So just jumping back to these third parties really quickly, I just wanted to show again kind of the breadth of what this is capturing and make it clear this is going across all your different repositories. These lists can be really hard to get. A lot of times developers may not even be aware of all the different third parties that are being used in an application because multiple developers may be using multiple different APIs. So this can be really useful as well. And we take a look at assessments here. So this is our ROPA feature. And what's really useful about this is it makes it easy to get developer details about an application. So if you want to look at a particular repository or particular ROPA, and I'll zoom this in if we need to. Okay, good, this looks pretty good. So we'll just briefly show you, and we get a questionnaire that describes, that's designed to help describe the application's business use case and why this data is needing to be processed. The main thing I want to show you here really quickly is just what's happening is Privado is basically seeding the form with all the PII data that was detected from the scan of this repository. So rather than having a developer go and dig all this information up and figure out where this is coming from, you can generate a report very quickly in literally one click and identifying the sender, or the recipient, the repository owner. And then you can see all of these data elements in this report that the developer can then just basically review. So they get the same thing. We start off in the code view for them so they can see where the code is being executed, but they also have the data flow view. So it's very easy for them to quickly boot up that context in their brain if they've forgotten it and see where this data is used in the application, get that application context, and then continue to fill out the form. So I'm going to jump back to the ROPA assessments and just show you really quickly how to get there. So if I was in the Shopify repository, you just click View Assessment because I have an active one. But you can create one very quickly here. Just fill out this quick form, and some of these are not even required. Most of these aren't even actually required. So then you just send that off to who it's going to, and then that's basically it. And then you're waiting for that developer, or you can collaborate with the developer to fill out that form and send it back. So that's basically what I wanted to cover here today. Does anybody have any questions as we move to the Q&A portion? Get us back to Q&A. I don't see any questions in the chat. Oh, here we go. Garage again. What is the language support and what is the false positive percentage given that this is static analysis? Great question. So we support all languages for the data inventory piece, all major languages. So dozens of languages. And then what you'll see for the data flow support specifically is we have Java by default was what we started with. And then we have also Python, JavaScript, and TypeScript. So those are the main languages we support, the data flows. And then, like I said, for the application inventory, which was the big list of PII data elements, the big list of third parties, that's available for all languages. Jim's asking for sandboxed or trial opportunities. Yes, absolutely. We do trials. We also do POCs as well to start people off and get them set up and cruising fast. Dev Slack and Discord community. Yeah, we have a Slack community that has been traditionally, I'd say, more focused on privacy in general, but we do have developers who are on there that are using the open source project as well. Katharina is asking, who defines what sensitive data is? It's not a legal term under GDPR, or does it refer to special category data? That's a good question. So we do some defining of categories on our own. We also support standards like the FHIR standard for healthcare, if you're familiar with that. We do also work with customers to define their own PII. What we've seen is that customers have items that may not traditionally be considered PII, but they will consider PII because it's a combination of data elements that equals some custom number or something in their system, or a custom identifier in their system that they don't want leaked because it could potentially be tied back to various things. And so we support that as well. Security certifications, Jim, good question. So we are SOC 2 and SOC Type 1 certified. Those are the primary ones we have right now. I believe we're considering working on some other ones, but that's where we are today. Best way to get in touch for sandbox access, Sam? Yeah, we'll have a way for you to get in touch, I think, at the end of the presentation, but you can reach out to me directly. My email address is just ben@privado.ai, and then I can put you in touch with sales folks and people getting that started. Otherwise, you can reach out through the website as well. Katharina is asking, does it scan data banks or also code? So it really just scans right now application source code. So it's not going to scan a database or a data store. What it will do is identify that code is going into those data stores. So if it's going to an S3 bucket, if it's going to a Postgres database, it will tell you that and tell you what data is being sent to it. But that's the extent of that. So the advantage of that is that we don't actually need to see any of your data. So Privado's never actually processing the PII itself. We're just identifying where in the application code that's being executed. Does Privado integrate with tools that Sam's asking, like OneTrust for ROPA? We do actually, specifically for ROPA. So you can do those things. You can do the ROPA reports and they'll get imported into OneTrust. We have customers that do that today. So the integration works really well. And that helps them keep those ROPAs up to date because you can just fill out basically an incrementally different ROPA, and Privado tracks all the different versions of that. And then we'll just push those into OneTrust for you. Can you integrate with CI/CD pipelines? Mohammed's asking to scan new code. Yes, we can and we do. So that's one of the things we recommend clients do actually for making sure that those are the Privado scanning is fully integrated. So you can use our API to run the scan arbitrarily. So if you want to run it every time a code is pushed to GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket, we support all the major code hosts, like I think I mentioned. You can do that. You can run it on just pull requests or merge requests. Really anytime you want, if you just want to run it periodically in the background. Katharina is asking a follow-up. It looks like, how does that work in detail? The scanning, is there some reading I can do to understand that better? Yeah, Katharina, I can point you to docs.privado.com. We'll explain kind of in detail how all the scanning works, how it breaks out the different PI data. It is static analysis under the hood. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but essentially what static analysis is a method for kind of synthetically executing a program so that you can get a sense of what the application would do if it was actually running live. So that's the best kind of like very, very short description I can give you of that, but that's essentially how it works under the hood. And then we have some heuristics, some models and other things on top of that that help us figure out where the PI is, detect it, and track the flow through the application. Okay, and Sam's asking, what are some of the common pain points with using Privado that you've seen with your customers? I think the biggest one, Sam, probably being totally transparent, is those custom PI detections and figuring out where their PI is going if it's not the most standard types of PI. So that's not necessarily a problem for us to solve, but it is initially the scans can sometimes be disappointing in terms of the data content, but we do work with all of our customers, even in POCs, to tune those things up to make sure that everything that you're looking for is being detected. All right, Katharina says, I'm not sure how data scanning but not processing looks. I see. So I think, Katharina, the thing to note here that I thought maybe this helps with the distinction. We're not actually scanning the data itself, or we're looking at the processing of the application. So if you think about it, if I have a program that just takes in your first name and your last name and spits out the first and the last name together as a single word without a space in between, we're looking at the application code that does that and saying, okay, this looks like it takes in a variable called first name and last name, and it looks like the return in the function is also returning first name plus last name. And so from there, we basically can infer that the application is utilizing PII because we've got all these variable names in the data dictionary that are most commonly used for all these different types of person identifiable information. And Jim, looks like, are your rules, taxonomies, terms exposed and extensible? Yes, a lot of them are on our open source project. So you can go to github.com/privado-inc, I think is our repository, our organization there. And then if you click on Privado, just the repository called Privado, there's a ton of rules in there. You can see they're all open source. There's rules, there's violations and other things in there. And then the third question from Jim is your SaaS offering, or can we do our own scanning of your code and bring it on-prem? Yeah, we can do on-prem as well. We do have clients that do on-prem, but we do have a SaaS offering. Yeah, most of our customers are on our cloud, but we do have on-prem as well. And Mohammed is asking, in addition to code scan, can you also scan data at rest for data that was ingested from external sources outside of your own code? So we don't do any data at rest scanning currently. It's something we have talked about, but today we don't do any database scanning or data source scanning. Just is the application sending data to a third party or a database, or it could be pulling data out of a database or a third party, depending on what the application code is doing. But we're not actually looking at your data at rest now. Then for getting started, yeah, please do reach out. As I mentioned, you can contact me directly, just ben@privado.ai, and I can route you to the best folks to get you started with the POC. Also happy to just chat about product stuff. If anybody just wants some one-on-one conversation to dig deeper on questions, happy to do that as well. No pressure. It'll just be product questions and things like that. So happy to do that. And then if you're going to be at IAPP this year, we will be there in Washington, D.C. on the 4th through the 5th. So we'll have a booth, come by, say hi, get some swag, etc. All the usual conference stuff. We'd love to see you. All right. I think, Hernando, am I passing it back to you?
Sure. Yeah. No, thank you, everybody. Really, really great questions. This was fantastic. And we'll follow up with some of you. It sounds like there's further questions that people are curious about. So we'll wrap it up here. Thank you, Ben. Fantastic. And
thanks, everybody.
See you soon, everybody.